Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I am Nicole Jolly, the Vice President for Strategy and Engagement with the Urban League of Louisiana. I'm so excited for this conversation that we're hosting tonight and very grateful that you all have chosen to spend the next hour or so with us. Throughout our 83+ year history, the Urban League of Louisiana has worked hard to secure equity, economic self-reliance, and civil rights for our communities. And quality education is absolutely necessary to achieving that mission. So we serve in many ways as an advocate for education through things like our education equity reports, where we produce reports in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and will be expanding to other districts across the state, where we analyze and help translate what the data say about how students are doing across various school districts in Louisiana. We look specifically at race, economic status, and ability so that we can see how students of color, low-income students, and students with disabilities are really doing across the state. We also advocate for policy changes that support the growth and development of students. So we advocate for education policies that support students and not those that result in students being put at a disadvantage through no fault of their own, but rather through the structures, policies, and practices that were not designed to support them. And those are just some of the reasons why we decided that we needed to host this conversation this evening. So tonight is about making sure that you, the audience and residents of Louisiana, can advocate with us to ensure that decisions being made right now are for the benefit of all students. So the K-12 social studies curriculum standards, which are the topic of our conversation this evening, are in the process of being updated. So it's a process that is supposed to take place every 5 to 7 years. And this revision process is meant to update the content and timeline of what history is taught in Louisiana public schools. You'll hear much more about that from our panelists this evening. So I won't go into all of the details about why the standards are important because we have people much more familiar with them to be able to share that. But right now, and through the end of this month, the Louisiana Department of Education is seeking public comment on the revised standards before they're approved in early 2022. So we've brought this group of brilliant educators and education advocates together to help all of us better understand what we should be paying attention to in these new standards, and also hope that you will leave this evening feeling prepared to give your own public comment, which you can submit in writing through the Department of Education's portal. We'll be sharing a link to that at the end of the conversation this evening. Now, before I introduce the panel, I want to encourage the audience to submit questions. You can do that through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to try to save some time at the end to be able to ask some of the audience questions of our panelists. Now, I'd like to introduce our panel and invite them to turn their cameras on, and we will jump right into the conversation after I introduce them. So we have Miss Ciara Hart, who is an 8th grade history teacher and the Wellness and Family Engagement Coordinator at Kenilworth Science and Technology School in Baton Rouge. We have Miss Jaleesa Jones, who is the district-wide literacy specialist for East Baton Rouge Parish School System and also serves as a leadership development coach at LSU. Dr. Tiffanye McCoy-Thomas is the District Curriculum Supervisor of Social Studies at East Baton Rouge Parish School System, and she also serves as a Social Studies curriculum writer with the Department of Education. Then we have Representative Tammy Phelps, who is the State Representative of House District 3, which is in Shreveport, Louisiana. And lastly, we have Dr. Allisyn Swift, who is the Associate Director of Equity in Schools at Beloved Community. And they all just happen to be phenomenal and brilliant women on this panel tonight. So thank you all for taking the time to share your knowledge and your brilliance with all of us. We are excited to hear from you and to be able to integrate what we hear into the public comment. So our first question, I'm going to start off with some guidance from our most qualified expert on social studies, to help the audience better understand what the social studies standards are. So Dr. McCoy-Thomas, if you could please provide a bit more context for what we mean when we say there are new social studies standards and a bit about how they were developed.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. So when we reflect on social studies standards in education, the standards actually govern instruction. They spell out to a greater or lesser degree what the expectations are or the learning outcomes that students should experience as a result of any specific subject area. And in the case of social studies, from kindergarten through 12th grade, we begin inoculating students into understanding their community, their environment, what that means, all the way through the study of world history for by and large in the senior year. As to the revision of standards and all contents should be reviewed and revised accordingly. In Louisiana, it is recommended that the social studies standards would be reviewed every 5 years. We are well overdue because they have not been reviewed in better than 10 years at this point. And right now, there is a standards committee. The Department of Education put forth an interest application in which individuals who wanted to serve on this committee had to complete the application, indicate their interest, why they were interested, what their work has been in the work of social studies education, and they were chosen from across the state. This is inclusive of parents as well as students. There are a total of, I recall, I don't want to recall incorrectly, but I think there are at least 3 students that sit on the current panel. And it is their responsibility to look at the standards through the lens of educators, through the lens of the learners, through the lens of community advocates, and make a decision about what needs to be revised, why we would need to revise standards, and how we move forward for those standards. And while some decisions have been made from a very well-rounded panel. I had the opportunity at their kickoff. I was one of 3 individuals that was called in by state leadership to speak to them and pretty much kind of give them the send-off into their mission. So they have been engaging in some productive struggle, as we like to say in education, around this revision process. So what are we going to teach? Where should we teach it? For example, we know that the bulk of social studies content is taught in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So there's been conversation about leveling that off and preparing students in lower grades so that as they move up through middle school and even high school, they're ready to take on more robust, rigorous coursework that would lead to not only a better understanding, but the elevation of their voice and the decisions that they get to make as they move on into post-secondary life. So that is where these standards are. That's how we come to them. And that is currently what the revision process looks like. Now, we know there's a little bit of pushback, but I'll save that for some of my friends here.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy-Thomas. And we absolutely will be talking about all the sticking points and where there is tension and where we are struggling. So we have several curriculum experts on this panel. So we'd love to hear your perspective on how the standards will actually impact what happens in the classroom. And we'd love to start by hearing from you, Ms. Jones.
So I'm just going to give an overview quickly of what standards, why they matter, because I know we have some parents that are logged in tonight. And sometimes when we get into educational jargon, parents are like, wait, start from the beginning. So standards are they're the goal, the end goal. So it's what you want students to achieve before they leave a course, before they leave a class. It's going to, and you center your curriculum or your instruction around that. Some standards are more complex than others. So you may revisit some several times. You may see it within different lessons at different periods within a curriculum or scope and sequence. However, these standards with social studies are so important because, as Dr. McCoy stated, it has not been revised since around 2011. So it's well overdue, and we need to look at what exactly is being taught in our classrooms, and is it actually relevant or is it accurate? And how it plays out for all of our students and not just a specific group of students or a specific group of people, depending on who wrote it. So so when we're looking at the standards, we're looking at the goals of the class. We're looking at what students will actually achieve to be career and college ready before leaving a course.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And I want to offer Dr. McCoy-Thomas a chance to respond to this one as well about how the standards actually impact what happens in the classroom.
Especially when it pertains to social studies, the whole responsibility of the social studies teacher is in the early years, we're helping our learners see what their role and who they are within the context of their community. So, you know, who am I as a citizen? Who is the police officer? Who is the teacher? So who are these individuals that make up my community? As we move from the lower elementary up to the upper elementary grades, we're trying to give context. So in third grade, Louisiana is the state I live in. What do I know about my state? When did it become a state? What are some of its icons, its symbols, some of the people that have made my state what it is? And we continue along with that journey all the way through high school. So why is it important? I have to go back in the research and remember that the whole purpose for education is, it wasn't always to make you college and career ready. And that's a different context, but it wasn't to make us college and career ready. It was to ensure that you would behave and fit into society. Do you know how to go in and accept the social norms, the social parameters? Can you be a good citizen? And so that is the responsibility of education very early on. And when I think about the social studies context, it becomes so important because ours is a very woven fabric of history, if you will. However, the perspective from which we receive history instruction is told through one lens, and that is through the lens of the victors. I like to look at it like this. If I ask a lioness to tell me about her prey, the lioness is going to declare how she stalked and fought and did everything to feed her cubs. If I ask the gazelle about this same experience, he's going to tell me, I just dipped my head down to get a sip of water and the chick ambushed me. So at the end of the day, it becomes important because we're giving our learners a very explicit view, if you will, on the world, on culture, on identities, on values, on heroes. And it's especially important in social studies because we're telling children who they are, where they belong, or where they do not. And so often we have to remember this. It's called history for a reason. Who's telling the story? And so that's why it is critical for us to know what is taking place, that we, Ms. Jones referenced the fact, the basis of what's the facts. I always say this, what's provable? I don't want your perspective because I know that's been a bone of contention. It's not about perspective. What can we prove in fact? And I said this in times past. Every one of us on this panel can be given a same set of facts and come up with a different truth. It does not deny, my truth does not deny or dispel your truth. I just took that same set of facts and I came up with my truth. So I see social studies as the opportunity not only to continue to cultivate citizens that contribute to the building of this great land, but also that they see themselves and where they belonged in the building of this great land. And as the standards currently stand, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we do.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCoy-Thomas. And part of what you just expressed is the need for having a well-rounded education. So let's talk about why having a well-rounded education is important and what it actually looks like to have well-rounded education. How can this approach help us think about the social studies standards? And I would love to start with you, Dr. Swift.
Certainly, thank you so much. I'm loving the conversation already. So there's a certain things that we have to think about when we think about the well-rounded education, right? So first of all, we're thinking about our learners, right? Our students, and what it means for them to really have a well-rounded education, especially in this day and time. And so what I think about is I often think about, the achievement gap and why that exists. And so if you look at the achievement gap, you either have to come to one of two very big conclusions. One, that there are certain folks that are, Black and brown children specifically, and children with special needs, either they are not capable of learning content, or there is something going on with the pedagogical strategies that we're using and the curriculum that we're using that is inhibiting them in learning. And then if you take that track, then we have to kind of look at some of our policies and practices to see how folks can be educated on the same level. So when you don't see yourself represented, when you don't see things that to be true represented, and when things that people are teaching actually go in direct conflict with what your lived experience is, then you don't get to really see how that is relevant for you. Why am I learning these things? Why am I learning that America is a meritocracy and all I have to do is work hard, where I know that I see people that have 3 jobs that have no money, and I see people that are very rich that don't have any jobs that they go to every day, right? So you're trying to make sense of these things. And if your education is not lining up with your lived experience, then there's no way for you to really go forth and say, this is really for me, or to think that there's a lot of value in that. And so you create your own narratives, you create your own stories of what are going on that match your reality. And so what we're saying here is, how can we teach history in a way that matches the real lived experiences of everyone in America, and not just one lived experience of one category of folks?
Thank you, Dr. Swift. I would love to hear the perspective of our teacher who is actively in the classroom every day, Ms. Hart. And then we'll open it up and see if anyone else wants to add to that. But let's hear from you, Ms. Hart.
Thank you so much. And I really just want to shout out everyone who have went so far. The insight is truly phenomenal for me to hear as an educator, because oftentimes when navigating the social studies curriculum currently, there are so many adjustments and issues that we face. I've been complaining about our social studies curriculum since I became an educator 5 years ago. And the number one thing that I've always noticed is that it does not create a pathway for our students to really intrinsically involve themselves in the process of really analyzing history and what is. And I believe that a truly powerful social studies curriculum provides a pathway for students to not just be observers of their community, but to play a role in developing and supporting the community in which they want to see. And so teaching social studies for me, it's teaching our kids to become change agents and being able to evaluate and identify what has taken place in history. And how do I feel about these events that have taken place? And then what role do I want to play in either contributing to further change or, destroying some of the status quo? And the student won't be exposed to that unless they have facts and the truth. I always refer to teaching the truth as being able to provide my students with primary sources, which continuously tell us every single thing that we need to know about history. And by presenting students with clear facts, they can then take those facts and create observations themselves. And a lot of times we take that autonomy away from students by not allowing them the freedom to develop their own historical analysis of what exists. And so in my classroom in social studies, despite the current curriculum that we have, and in hopes of a new curriculum, what I recommend my students always do is take the facts and then decide how can they create a compelling question based on what they want to see, what they want to change, how they feel about that, how it took place, but more importantly, how does it impact us today? If we aren't able to take a deep dive into the standards and really look at how our students are impacted, then we are prohibiting our students from truly being able to look at the world around them and create the future that we want to see. We oftentimes say our students are the future, but if we are not providing pathways to help them understand where we come from, we can't expect them to create new pathways for where we are going. And so I am hopeful and encouraged that students, despite the many hiccups that we see around the debates in social studies, will understand that facts are facts, and it is up to them to really decipher and decide how they want to take up the mantle of all the things that we see and we know we experience in society, and then take that and create change with it. It's necessary.
Ms. Hart, everything that you're saying is reminding me, I honestly, even in preparing for this and in our conversation beforehand, I honestly forgot about my own experience in my social studies classes and forgot that social studies was always my favorite subject for exactly the reasons you just shared. And it absolutely made me be active in the ways that I am in my community today. So thank you for that perspective, Ms. Hart. And part of what you also shared was this idea of standards really as serving as the basis for our shared knowledge, what we all understand as the facts and our ability to process that information and come to our truth, as Dr. McCoy-Thomas said. So what do we need to be paying attention to in looking at these standards and the story that we are telling about history in our education system? And I want to start with you, Representative Phelps. You've expressed that you believe the new standards don't fully address African-American history or the contributions of people of color in Louisiana and the United States. So I'd love to hear your response to this question, Representative Phelps.
Oh, well, thank you, Nicole, and everyone on the panelists. Good evening, everyone. Just to start to echo everything that we all know, when Dr. Jones mentioned about, I'm sorry, Ms. Jones, about the standards and the curriculum, or if it's Dr. McCoy. Those things are the responsibility of, we'll just say, starting with the state. Of course, they set the standards and the district has the autonomy for the curriculum. That has been one of my biggest, I guess, pet peeves, because how can we be consistent across the board, across Louisiana, if there's no standard curriculum, you know? And so you give a minimum. And I think that's the biggest concern. And that's something I have shared with the superintendent. The language that's throughout this draft, including but not limited to, that was very concerning, again, because I say, if every district has the autonomy to do what they want, we have 64 parishes doing everything different. Students are not prepared when they move from Caddo to Orleans. They're not competitive with other states. And I always say that anything we do should be to improve our rankings and our scores. Ultimately, I mean, there's no reason to not have that in mind when we make changes. And at this point, the way we have been doing it with the autonomy, 64 parishes still creates one number. We're still at the bottom. So where do we start to actually enhance those numbers and give our students the learning ability, when at the end of the day, if they're learning something different in Caddo in Ms. Jones's class, and they didn't hear about Madam C.J. Walker from Delta, Louisiana, in Ms. Smith's class, there's still a difference in a learning, a different experience for each student. So again, I didn't know what the charge was when the committee actually received their directions, you know, so I asked that question. And when I wanted to go into, let me go back to, when we talk about who are we when we see our community, that was so right on point, because that was part of the education committee, even asking the question, we waiting rather to see, well, let's give the panel or the committee an opportunity to revise the standards, where we had already asked, we would like to see more inclusiveness, African-American history, not just African-American history, which, you know, of course, that's our primary focus, but all inclusiveness to all the races that have contributed. And I'll stay in Louisiana because that's where my first interest is. If we can't learn about Louisiana history in our Louisiana classes, we are not serving our students well as it comes to history. And so when they can't identify, and I was just agreeing with everything that was said, if I can't put myself in place in history and someone's not telling me that all these things happen, and it's avoiding and want to only tell about one race that we know that has gone on forever and a day, when do we start, and why is that still going on? I think all of us on this panel can probably look back to see we didn't get enough of history of our own people. So we know that's been done with the Indian, Spanish, French, you know, even in our state, because everyone have made contributions. So we don't want to, just for sake of the education committee, because we know where the rabbit hole takes us with our counterparts, We just want inclusiveness that's not being taught. And now that narrative turns into, now is critical race theory, because we want to make someone feel inferior, because now we want to be talked about just as much as everyone else. So that was a basis of, I think we're having this conversation because that became the buzzword after we were just asking for more inclusiveness. As it relates to even the chairman of the board, and I'm sure chairman of the education committee, Representative Garofalo, if I can just share a little bit about his excerpt, just shows the very opposite of what we know should be happening. In his bill, when he refers to race or sex scapegoating, he says that's meaning or assigning fault, blame, or bias to a race or sex to members of a race or sex because of their race or sex, or claiming that consciously or unconsciously, and by virtue of a person's race or sex, members of any race inherently racist and inherently inclined to oppress others, or that members of a sex are inherently sexist or inherently inclined to oppress others. That has nothing to do with history of telling the facts or the facts, and it actually happened. So unfortunately, we're at the cusp of trying to change the narrative that is being intentionally changed just to include contributions of all of us, to spend time now on I would have to say, Republican agenda of saying, and I think some of you may have, I don't know if you've ever heard of David Barton, but this is kind of where this agenda comes from. Again, just the opposite of a historian, just the opposite of facts being facts. He is a self-styled historian that has acted as a bridge between the mainstream political right and the political religious ideology. So that's the backlash that we're dealing with in our chamber of trying to say that's really not what we're asking, and we're not going to allow you to change the narrative to not teach and give our students the opportunity to learn what they should be. And at the last meeting of the panel, making a recommendation to the Department of Education, to the Bessie board, I knew we were in the right place doing the right thing, because there was a gentleman, I believe maybe he's 20 years old. I'm not sure what ethnic group he's from. I've forgotten where he's from, but of course, non-American, non-white. He was there on behalf of 5 siblings that he has at home, who actually gave testimony that he did not learn hardly enough about even Louisiana history. And he's concerned about what his siblings would learn. And he was at that meeting at the Department of Ed. That says we have to do more. And it just gave, the stamp on what this issue is about. We are on the right path.
Thank you, Representative Phelps, and thank you for being vocal in the legislature. We are grateful for your advocacy. And you introduced, right, this topic that we keep hearing about in relation to the social studies standards, critical race theory, which happens to be the foundation of my master's thesis. But I would love to let others jump in on this and add to why we keep hearing about critical race theory in the public discourse about the standards. And we'll start with Dr. Swift, but I am sure others would like to jump in.
Yes, please, including yourself, Nicole, because if your thesis is on this, go right ahead. First of all, thank you so much for giving us that context, Representative Phelps. And I do want to say, in terms of answering your question, which is initially, why do we keep hearing so much about critical race theory or CRT? I think that, first of all, it is a massive diversion from the issues, as Representative Phelps actually said. It has nothing to do with what we teach in K through 12 education. So we can leave that there. It also has nothing to do with some of the things that she quoted the representative saying in the body of having people feel guilty and all of those things, right? So first, I don't want to shy away from critical race theory, because I think that unfortunately what happens is that as soon as someone says critical race theory, then people say, oh no, we're not doing that and run away from it. And I don't want to run away from it because I think it's an extremely valuable theoretical framework for being able to think about our country and look at the laws. So critical race theory was started as a theory in law school, a theoretical framework, as there are in many different functions of scholarship. I have many as a psychologist that I love, right? But they are not taught in K through 12 education, but really it is as a lens to be able to look at the United States, look at the history, and to see how there has been some distinct policies and practices along the way that have either disadvantaged or advantaged different communities because of race and how that has happened. And so it's just a lens of being able to look at a document that says all men are created equal, but then at the same time, we know that there are slaves at the same time, right? So what is the critical difference there? And then taking that thread through to something like the New Deal, where there is like all of these policies that obviously did favor, and that there were Southern states that really petitioned to have it be something that was state-led and not federally led, so that they can decide how it rolls out in different places, right? And so if you don't have that history or that context, then again, you are left with just seeing one race as not being able to do because inferiority, right? Let's be honest, but that's how it comes from. So that is that. Now, again, this is a theoretical framework that is taught in universities. In no way does it shame anybody. I think it goes back to some things that were said before about telling the truth or not. You can tell the truth and you can leave with feeling a certain way about it, or you can think about having a more nuanced conversation, how that kind of adds to it. However, I really just want to say something that really does strike a tone with me that Representative Phelps said about our children being really ready to contribute and also being competitive. There are other states and even within our state, there are places that are doing a much better job of telling history than our own public schools. And the thing is that means that right from the start, we are creating a gap in education. We are creating a gap in what children know. And we are waiting for them to get to college and then be surprised. And for some white folks, even traumatized by what they hear, right? Because they have not even had the lens to be able to work through these nuances, right? And so this is what we're talking about. How are we preparing our children to really think about all of the nuances, right? As a psychologist, I always want to say that we need to be realistic, right? Nothing is either all good or all bad. If we're thinking that something is all good, we're going to get into some traps there. If we're thinking something is all bad, we get into some traps there. So how do we make a realistic view of the United States, a realistic view of Louisiana, and see all the contributions of all the people? But I want to be very, very clear that critical race theory in no way says anything about the context of someone's inner thinking, nor does it talk about who is better or who isn't. It simply talks about how in legal practice throughout the history of America, there is this lens that it has definitely benefited rich white people and has not benefited pretty much everyone else in the same way. So I just want to be very, 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 very clear that I don't want to back away from CRT because it's an important framework and it's definitely needed as a lens. However, it is not something that's taught in K through 12 education at all. And we're just talking about telling the truth, right? And that's what everybody should want for their children.
Thank you so much for setting the record straight, Dr. Swift. And I see you, Ms. Hart, ready to jump in.
Yes, I actually wanted to share one of my former students. I taught them while they were in 8th grade, and right now they are in 11th grade at Lehigh. And when we talked about this discussion coming up, she wanted to send me something to share. And so I'd like to read her response to you all just in regards to history and how she feels about the discussion. So she says, it's important to tell the truth so that students can know real history. Without real history, learning something that's false will not serve its purpose. History is learned so that generations to come won't make the same mistakes and know their roots in order to grow. Without knowing what really happened, how will we do that? I think that we completely underestimate the ability of our students to recognize and analyze not only what they are currently experiencing, but also what has happened in the past. We forget that as people of color, history is our lived experiences. A lot of the things that we learn about are not too far removed from personal experiences that we've had. We have a very high immigrant population, especially in Louisiana. It increases every year. Yet we shy away from teaching about migratory patterns of immigration policies and how those students are being taught. Although we have students in our classroom who are being impacted by those same policies that were put in place years ago. We have students who have had to move for different reasons. So migratory patterns that we could analyze from the civil rights movement and from students becoming, being able to really recognize how their past events that may have happened in their family can be traced back to things that have happened in history, and allowing them to truly find a cause and a link between the two. We underestimate how our students are really able to recognize and analyze that. Every day in my classroom, I am able to witness that our children have the scope and understanding and full analysis to be able to grapple with a lot of these heavy concepts. And we as an adult project our insecurities and not being able to do that onto our children, when if we give them the tools, they are fully prepared to be able to do so. And so for me, it becomes frustrating because we cannot underestimate the ability and the brilliance of our children to really analyze the future and do better. I think that the fear is they'll take what they see and it'll be something different than what folks are used to. But I always remind my kids, it was always a few that started to kind of change and shift the narratives. And if we don't continue to push the narratives, then how do we ignite the flame in those few to then go ahead and do the same?
That was so perfect, Ms. Hart, and thank you for bringing the voice of your student into this conversation. I see. I think Ms. Jones, you were next, and then we'll go to you, Dr. McCoy-Thomas.
I just wanted to, first of all, Dr. Swift, that was so powerful. I love everything that you said, and she really made me think about the hidden curriculum. And when people don't realize that, that's very real within our institutions, within our educational institutions, and how the controlling class uses that to dominate everything that's going on in our society. So when you start looking at things like this and we say, how did they get on that topic? Or how did they, get to that point when it wasn't even aligned? It's just another way to try to spin the narrative or to deflect and defer, move us away from what we're actually trying to do here. All we wanted was for there to be more conversations about African Americans outside of the civil rights movement. Our kids need to know more than the civil rights movement. So when you start to, and that's all we asked for, we have architects, we have people that have did great things outside of civil rights and voting rights. If we limit our students to that, to where that's all we're going to talk about, how can they see themselves within our curriculum, and how can they see themselves within history if they only see one view or one image of themselves? So I think that we have had people that kind of moved us off the path that we were on and tried to make it more than what it was. But I absolutely, just want to kudos everything that you were saying, because that's absolutely what's happening.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Dr. McCoy-Thomas, would love to hear from you on all of this.
Yeah, it's probably more to say than time we have left, but to my colleague, Dr. Swift, thank you. We don't dispel any other theoretical or conceptual frameworks when we're looking at things. I have little people coming in, so forgive me. And if we were looking at this through math, we wouldn't be debating what children need to know to be productive in mathematics. We are not fighting around English standards as it pertains to the kind of text, looking at text complexity, looking at the color of text, maybe. But I would offer to us as a body as a group, as those activists with boots on the grounds, that the education system is not broken. That is why we see things that are happening in the same familiar pattern. I can remember as an 11th grade student, I asked my US history teacher, how is it that the Jews suffering in World War II is named a Holocaust, but the Middle Passage experience is not defined in the same way? When you look at the definition of a Holocaust, it is catastrophic. It is inflammatory in nature. Well, I would argue more than 10 million bodies potentially lying at the bottom of the Atlantic in a desperate attempt to flee being captive as a Holocaust experience. But education is not broken. It's doing what it was designed to do. And we can go back to Thomas Jefferson and the establishment of the University of Virginia. We have to have a class that will and a class that will serve those that will. When we look at Woodrow Wilson and his speeches back in 1891, we must always preserve a ruling class and ensure that someone is there to serve them. In this country, it was decided through the social construct of race, because really and truly Black and white does not exist. If you don't believe me, ask my grandchildren, because they're confused. Look at me and we'll go down the continuum. That they don't fit in Crayola's box, that is not what color they are. And I thank Crayola for finally catching up and providing us with a much more diverse assortment. But at the end of the day, education is doing what it was always intended to do, to ensure a divided class, that someone can and someone would serve. And they just decided that the people who were going to serve looked like this panel. I'm sorry. Whether we were in the kitchen cooking, sell shy high, or whether we were literally meeting our quota in the field with the bales of hay, it's doing what it was designed to do. The question becomes, through this process, how do we bend it so that it can do what it is supposed to? And that is to ensure, I think it was you, Dr. Swift, who referenced opportunity, the achievement gap. I don't believe in an achievement gap. I believe that there is an opportunity and accessibility gap. And we give opportunities and accessibilities in certain places, in certain spaces, to certain people. And we do that, to Ms. Jones's point, of that hidden curriculum. So we zone this way, so this school lies in this zip code, and so it automatically isn't included. We allow this school district to have a program with a multi-million-dollar building, but you don't get a school performance score. That score goes back to the school down the road that you would have attended, but we get to have an admissions criteria. We get to say this, we get to say that. So the system is doing what it was designed to do, ladies. At the end of the day, it's time to stop it in its tracks.
I feel like that was a drop the mic moment. So thank you, Dr. McCoy-Thomas. Oh, but we have so much still left to say. So I see Dr. Swift, let's go back to you. And then Ms. Hart and Representative Phelps.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'll try to be brief, but there's a couple things that I wanted to say, because I think that it was Miss Hart that had mentioned, and first of all, thank you so much for sharing. I love hearing from the students. I love hearing from the children. That's supposed to be why we're all here in the first place. So thank you so much for bringing their voices into this space. And I just want to say that I think that one of the ways with how we currently teach history is that we are taught to believe that it's just a few people that are trying to push these issues, and that's how things get changed, where actually it's the opposite. There is a few people that are trying to hold on to a certain type of system that have pushed down the majority. And if we really are teaching that way, right, then we should not have any fear about how, say, white children might feel upon hearing their history, because they'll learn of the many, many co-conspirators that have been trying to push this way since the beginning of our country, right? But we don't teach that. We teach it that those people were on the extreme. John Brown was crazy, right? That's what we hear. And that is how we are giving voice to, and also really not even paying attention to those people in history and thinking about, those Jewish boys that were killed in Mississippi as well, right? We don't teach about that. We teach about Martin Luther King, and that is wonderful, and we should keep doing that. But let's have a more nuanced conversation about all the contributions of all Americans. And if we actually had that nuanced conversation, then we can really go against all that narrative that we're going to have white children feeling bad about themselves, because that does not make any sense. And actually, that does not even play out in what we see and how Germany teaches history, right? They teach about the Holocaust in their schools. And actually, when I had to do some reporting on this for some documents that I was helping to bolster this very issue we're talking about tonight, I heard the voices of some German children that were talking about how much they appreciate having that history so that they don't repeat it, and how they're still proud to be a German no matter what they're learning in history, because they're proud that they know the truth, and so they know not to make those mistakes again. And when we talk about the majority, from Public Innovators in Education just did this wonderful study across the United States and across racial lines and political affiliation. And they said that 81% of parents across racial party lines agree that Black history should be woven throughout the curriculum. 81% across parties. 86% agreed to this statement: we should be taught to love America, and we should acknowledge the terrible things that have happened in our nation's history regarding race so students can learn from them and make the future better. So the real question is, why are we catering programs to really suit a minority, a very loud, but a minority, right? That's exactly what we're doing if we're not listening to this kind of research, right? That says that 86% of parents across racial, economic, and party lines, right, agree. That's really powerful data. And so what we're doing is now we're starting to skew again towards that small but loud minority, again, to swing the fate of an entire state and country. And that is not what a democracy is supposed to be. But then again, to what Dr. McCoy-Thomas says, it is it's doing what it was built to do.
Absolutely, Dr. Swift. And Ms. Hart, I'll let you jump in.
I wanted to go to Dr. McCoy-Thomas's point earlier concerning the standards. For me as a history educator, specifically 8th grade Louisiana history, I fear that the verbiage of the standards will allow for an autonomy that will not truly grasp the entire wealth of knowledge that is accessible for our history students, and specifically Louisiana history. There is a wealth of information that I believe is valuable for our students to truly understand. And when looking at the switch from Louisiana history to United States history for the 8th graders, I fear that if we are not specific in being able to kind of highlight the impact of not just Louisiana as a culture, but as a people, but the historical events that have taken place here from the beginnings of time, they will miss out on that wealth of truly understanding how their state has impacted the United States, not just as a cultural hub, but as an economic hub and a political hub. And so I fear what that autonomy and that language will do, specifically if they are in fear of what teaching the truth will be and how our State Department plans on addressing this, because not having that cohesive curriculum across the board and not having solidified, compelling questions and things that we can pull from as educators, then allow for research and things to come into place. And yes, of course, I always add research into my students' work, but the basis is based on the standards that we are given. And so I encourage the thought process of thinking, how are we going to expand beyond what we currently have if they are passed? And then how do we take it a next step to ensure that we are cohesive across the state so that we are all learning how to move forward?
Thank you, Ms. Hart. Representative Phelps, did you still want to jump in on some of these points being made?
Just a few, again, thank you to everyone for those comments, because even when we mentioned the Holocaust and the students learning about that, that was one of the subjects that came across where another representative wanted to, all of a sudden include the Holocaust. And again, we're saying, okay, we're talking about Jewish history there. Okay, what about if you want to define that? Okay, let's talk about the Middle Passage. They didn't even know what the meaning was, But again, we were like, you can't tell one and not tell the other. History is history. And that's what we're still trying to hone in and, beat the drum, because they're refusing not to hear that. And the percentages that you gave, Dr. Swift, I think that would be a start of what we can continue to do after this conversation. Engaging parents. I think we're just on a mission. We cannot stop now. And Nicole, I thank the Urban League for this opportunity, because where do we go from here? We keep on with the conversation, and even educating our own. And unfortunately, we always hear about other ethnic groups continuing on their heritage. And we do need to do a better job of demanding that and having a picture of it in our own communities as well. And I would hate to say at the last resort, being engaged may mean, how do we legally, demand this right, and I don't know the answer to that right now. But I know this has to be a start of the conversation where I always say, we're only here now, we only know what we can do now. And I think we have to do the best we can, because we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. But I am willing and looking forward to continuing the conversation where our parents throughout the state, is involved in. A lot of them, even that's tuned in today, I don't know if they really know what goes on behind, curriculum standards. And, thankful to, all of you who are concerned about that and coming to the forefront to kind of enlighten our parents in what this struggle is, because I don't know if they even really know, just with teaching social studies has become such a chore.
Wondering if anyone else has a response to some of what we've heard.
I just have one more. Also thinking about the accessibility that our students have to current history, we just had an influx of racial tension happening in this country. And then a lot of positive things happening. For example, the Tulsa Massacre being recognized. I had previous students message me like, Ms. Hart, why didn't we learn about this? We learned about, like, they refer to other things, and they look to me, because we learned so many things, to add this. And I just told them, babies, we didn't have enough time. Like, there is a wealth of things that they haven't been exposed to and don't know about. And technology has made it so accessible, so that if we are not directly teaching it in the classroom in a way that is conducive, they will get it from social media and other places. And so I think it is imperative for us to utilize that to our advantage, to recognize that our students are getting this information, and sometimes in not the best way. How can we take what they are learning in the present and connect that to the past, so that they can understand how they can move forward and create better now and in the future?
Dr.
McCoy-Thomas, I know you have a response to that.
Well, I would also say one of the things we have to remember, you referenced is hard time, and it's always one of the things I try in training social studies teachers is I understand and respect that you feel like you are against a clock in terms of time and pacing. It has always been my belief as a teacher. In my class, probably, Ms. Hart, you could have been a student there, because they used to always say it was life 101, because at the end of the day, I needed to weave it so the kids can see themselves. Because if they don't see themselves, then they always want to know, why do I need to know this? I don't know, all of these people are dead. And so until we give it proper context and relevance, it doesn't matter. But in the revision of standards, in the interest of time, one of the other things that we really have to consider is, with this change, is going to be an absolute change in assessments, because we cannot change the standards and then the assessments align to something that is not taught. And that in and of itself is another monumental task that we would have set before us. But think about what we would be saying, not only to the learners that we have the responsibility. I use this word all the time. We serve. We are civil servants. At the end of the day, you drive what you drive, you live where you live, you wear what you wear, you eat where you eat, on the backs of the children and the desk and the buildings that you go into every single day of your life. And so if you're doing it a disservice, one could reference that as its own form of slavery. But at the end of the day, so it goes beyond just adjusting these standards. We are going to also now have to tackle tests. And I know, Dr. Swift, you know this all too well. What did those initial IQ assessments look like? Because we did not expose, we did not consider. When you don't understand me, I had a woman tell me, and I'm being quiet, I don't see color. I told her the most insulting thing that you could do to me is say that you don't see color. I say, I see a white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. If you don't see my color, you won't look into my situation. You'll never understand what it is I need. And therefore you will not look at how you are able to position yourself as ally or enemy to assist me. At the end of the day, there is no in the middle on this subject, as Dr. Kendi has well let us know. You either are a racist or an anti-racist. There is a position to act. You don't get to fall in the middle of the line. And we have so much work, so much more work than just revising standards. What do those assessments say and how will they prepare our learners? But again, if they don't see themselves, there is no interest. And when I say our, social studies scores are typically the lowest in the school district. They're probably the lowest in the state because one, there is no interest. I don't see me, nothing looks like me. I can't relate to any of this, but we also dismissed the value of the lived experience of the child in our desk because we won't even stop to say, how can I connect this issue in the standards to perhaps a relevant issue that a child is experiencing right now? Because when you can draw that through line, they are not only interested, they're hungry. They want to know, they want to be heard, and they will elevate their voice. And I believe one of my colleagues here said this earlier. That is the fear, that when we teach them the facts, they are going to develop a voice that will no longer be silent in the night because you said so. It is going to move forward. And you know what? It may actually change the trajectory, and we might live up to all men were created equal. We might get there one day if we teach these children facts.
This is exactly the reason why education equity matters to the Urban League, right? We need people to be educated in order to see the level of liberation and civil rights that we seek. So you all have mentioned why it is so important for students to see themselves in the curriculum. A lot of you, including the audience members, have articulated how important it is for students and parents to be a part of the process, for students' voices to be heard inside and outside the classroom. And we are all here because there is a moment right now, an opportunity to be able to engage in at least this part of the social studies standards process. I would love to hear from our panelists about really what is needed from us in this conversation, meaning everyone who is here now, everyone who watches the recording of this panel, and everyone that we can reach through the Urban League's platforms. What is needed from us? What can we be doing to make our voices heard in this process? Representative Phelps, what do legislators need from the public? I would love to hear from you all in our last 15 minutes about really what's next. How can we be active? What can we do? How do we respond to these standards? I'll start with you, Representative Phelps.
Oh, thank you. And if I may just go back a little bit to comment on Dr. McCoy-Thomas's comment about the assessments. That's exactly what I was thinking to comment on, because I have a list here that I had questions at the Standards Review Committee as they were making the adoption. And that was the question of, you know, how do you determine which questions will be on the test? We're still teaching the test. We're not teaching students. And keeping that in mind, that of course, if you're teaching new standards, you have to revise the test questions. I can't tell you the vague answer that I got, but that is, you know, a topic that came up as well. And I don't know how that's going to be addressed, but I will be asking that question again, because you can't increase the standards without doing something different to the test and not telling us how or what's going to be done. So going back to what do we need from the public? Just continued engagement. Unfortunately, it's always like, of course, we can't be in this, let me just go back, not unfortunately, but we are in this position because we have been chosen to be the voice for the people that we serve, because everyone cannot be in their chamber for themselves. And unfortunately, things do not change if they're not present with us most of the time, you know, and that's because some people have just changed the narrative to where they may listen more when we have the public engagement. Sometimes it falls on deaf ears, but it's always worth it when you show up. You just don't know how much that means to us, because it gives us more strength. And we know we just can't do it without you, but you don't know what your presence brings. And there's some people that show up every day during the session that do not have students in our classrooms. You know, they could be home enjoying their retirement, but again, because they love Louisiana and they love our next generation, they are there with voices. So that is one thing we can continue to do. And because the other party always shows up, and there's always a comparison. And so please know it's already a struggle. But again, we need you. We cannot unfortunately do it by ourselves. But we will continue to be that voice. As it relates to the 37 of us, we still have to hold our members accountable from the speaker down. I know we have to do it differently. And I think we're always trying to engage in ways to hold that accountability and to be a voice. But I think one of those things that we mentioned earlier, we cannot just talk about it now and let it go away, and I know in the past we may have done that, but we have to do, and we will do a better job of keeping those things present before you all to know what's going on. And this is a year where we have unlimited bills. I know we will be addressing this issue again. Representative Duplessis spoke with him yesterday, and that's one of the things that we will be talking about as a caucus, because we cannot be silent on the very thing that we looked at to be, divisive of just trying to include everyone's contributions. I think there was a second part. You asked me what.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Phelps. Yeah, and just so that everybody in the audience knows, Representative Phelps is referring to the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus, which has been just phenomenally present in advocating at the legislature always, but this last year there were some tough battles. And so making sure that folks are present in committee meetings, that we are, to your point, being heard and showing up to show visibly that there is support. And
can I mention
that will be true of BESI meetings too. BESI meetings, school board meetings.
Right. And may I don't know if we could do it without our chairman, Representative Ted James, and the board committee members. I mean, everyone. It's just been a year that like none other. But if I could just give accolades to our chairman, that we would not be here today because of him. Even when he's had a rough year, even with our COVID, with him still being here, not knowing if he would be active. He's like, you cannot leave us, and we're glad he did not. But it's really because of his leadership that you see me here today.
Thank you, Representative Phelps, my colleague as well. So thank you, Representative James. I'd love to hear from other folks that might have ideas, suggestions for the audience on how to take advantage of this opportunity, as well as other opportunities to fight for education equity and the curriculum that we need and deserve.
We have got to ensure that we as an education community are not pushing parents away. I firmly believe parents, sometimes there's not an absence of engagement. There's an absence of inclusion. Parents have had bad experiences in schools, and so they're less likely to come around. I have personally witnessed, and as an educator, had to apologize for the treatment of parents. But if we keep them on the outside and then blame them for what we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, how can we move forward? We're serving them, but we haven't involved them in the fight. Who can advocate better for your child, if not you? And so I really think I almost want to say it's kind of like a church event. Bring a friend. If you are a parent and you're a part of this conversation, you're listening, then talk to your neighbor, talk to your family members, make sure they're involved. And I say all the time to teachers, even if it's not your child, you have a child in your life that you love. Do it for that child, because you don't know where it stops. Everything comes full circle, and you reap what you sow, even if you don't reap where you've sown it. So we've got to be careful, but we really have to galvanize parents and make sure they understand that they're asking the right questions. We need parent advocacy groups so desperately, because they don't even know what to ask, who they should ask, who do I contact? And I really think, and I say this as an educator, so I don't remove myself from the problem. It serves education when parents are removed, or they won't come in, or they won't answer the phone, because then who are we being accountable? To whom are we being accountable if we have removed them from an opportunity to get in the trenches with us, serve and support us, and be our allies as we educate their learner for future opportunities. So we really have to speak to parents, get parents, make them aware. And to the point of Representative Phelps, we show up for a lot of stuff. You don't have to tell us when Southern is playing at home. Nobody needs to announce when the Tigers are going to take the field in Baton Rouge. So you don't have to galvanize us when it's stuff that we care about. We've got to let children come to the top of our priorities in the same way that we do some other things. And, you know, if I get parents to a football game, nobody tells them to clap. So that's the same spirit and mindset with which we have to bring them to the table around this. Inform them, equip them, support them, answer their questions, even when it doesn't prove favorable for us as a profession. We owe them that much. Anything else is educative malpractice.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. Let's hear from our educators. I see Ms. Jones and Ms. Hart, you both have something to say.
Thank you.
Oh, Ms. Jones, you're muted.
I just wanted to piggyback off what Dr. McCoy was saying, especially with our parents. I had a colleague that said that when parents send their kids to school, they're sending you their best. They expect you to do right by their children. They expect you to prepare their children. They expect you to be able to give their children what they cannot give them. And we have to take ownership of that. We talk a lot about about students taking ownership in classrooms, but we have to take ownership as the adults leading and the adults that are in positions to be able to influence what's going on. I recently looked at a guidebooks lesson that tied in history, and it was representing Christopher Columbus as a helper to indigenous people and saying that he helped them to learn how to shoot a gun and to, get crops. And I was blown away because I was like, I cannot believe that this is what they are telling our children. However, we have to be able to go into spaces and scream that to the mountaintops of what's really going on to be able to see true change. When I think about our kids think about these standards and looking at some of the units, the units on economics, you can absolutely discuss, Savitri Wilson from Louisiana, who was influential, a Nobel Prize winner when it came to public service, and how she, provided supply and demand. That's what the unit is on. That's what it's talking about. Why can't we bring in people like that so our children can see different folks? And guess what? She's young. She probably come to our classrooms and be able to discuss it with us. But we have to have that autonomy. We have to have we have to allow our teachers to have that as well. We have to work with what we have, but at the same time, we have to be able to influence what we want to see in the classroom. So like Dr. McCoy said, if we can make it to every game on game night, and we can, and most of us are up there 3 hours early because we want to, get away from the traffic. So if we can do that, then we have to be, serious about this fight and what we want our kids to learn, and truly being advocates for education.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And we are going to have the link to the public comment up on the slide in just a second as well. Let's hear from you, Ms. Hart, and then I think Dr. Swift, you will probably be our closing comment.
Dr. McCoy, I would absolutely love to be in your class, even right now. Okay, my brain is open.
We're all in class right now. If you didn't know. Any
day. I really want to talk about the opportunity for accessibility. Equity to me is always, do students have the access to the opportunities to really create a full and a really just full life? If we are having bestie meetings during the day, I, for one, as an educator and community organizer, I'm so used to going to school board meetings and giving public comment. But that bestie meetings are held during the day. So not only are you limiting the amount of parents who are included in this process, like Dr. McCoy said, but you're also limiting student voice. You're also limiting those who can really provide that input and really have that seat at the table. And so what I encourage everyone who is listening to do, and even our fellow networks, is to continue to push the link and have students fill out the form to really say how they feel about the inclusion of history, to pass it to your friends. In the same way you post a flyer about different events that you can attend, we can post a link and commit to being able to do that so that we can get as much public comment by November 30th as possible to ensure that that perspective is broad and that those Black and brown parents who have been removed from this process are really included. And if they aren't able to physically be present, at least we know that their public comments will be received, and it's imperative that their voice is at the table.
Thank you. Dr. Swift.
Thank you. Well, so when you ask about what advice do we have for folks that are listening, I'm so glad that we gave advice to the public, to parents, to educators. And so my advice would be this: if you are a business owner, if you know people that own businesses, many big corporations put out these wonderful statements on racial equity in the last year and a half. And so now I beg and implore you to get some skin in the game, because things do not change in this country unless the finances swing in ways to say that it does change. So if you are a person with a lot of money that is in charge of businesses and corporations, this is your chance to make good on calling your representatives with your power and privilege and helping educators, because unfortunately, educators are not listened to in the way that they need to be listened to, nor are parents, if we are very honest about that, right? The money is. And so if you have that money, lead with that. Another thing that I want to say, and I'm saying this very explicitly, if you are white, you also do have that power and privilege, that we have been fighting for freedoms and for education and for so many things since 1619, but nothing has ever changed the needle as when you get in the game and align and actually help us to move agendas forwards. And that, unfortunately, is the honest truth. So when we talk about we need to get involved, we need to organize, we've been involved, we've been organized since 1619. Nothing has ever changed unless you have also helped and been very fervent in standing tall and standing with us. So I would say that we need all of the allies to become co-conspirators. This is not a time to sit on the line. We are organized, we have been organized. This is what power and privilege means. You have the power and the privilege to actually have your voices heard. So listen to ours and you can deliver it to the folks that will listen to you.
See everybody, amen. Fire emojis, everything to what you just said. We're all in agreement. I could not have thought of a better panel for this conversation. You truly all have given such incredible information, insight. We really were all in class and we were schooled tonight in the best way. So truly thank you, Ms. Hart, Dr. Swift, Dr. McCoy-Thomas, Ms. Jones, and Representative Phelps for sharing your wisdom with us this evening. Last but not least, again, our purpose is that we have a window of opportunity right now to give input, to let the Department of Education know that we want something to be different in these social studies standards, that there might be information missing, that we might need to be a little bit more clear on what is going to be the actual standard across the state. So we hope that you will go to urbanleaguela.org/social justice. It's a very long link. So we did have somebody share the link in the chat. Thank you for that. I think Karen Clark, thank you for putting it in the chat. It's very long though, so we have it on our website for you all to be able to find it in case you couldn't grab it this evening. You have until the 30th, and this panel was recorded. So if you know people who maybe missed it or want to be able to give their own public comment, share this video with them. You'll get it later this week so that we can really, again, show up and not just the folks who are on this panel. But that'll be it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, audience. Thank you, panelists. Again, you are all brilliant, and thank you for what you do every day in our education system. Thank you.
Thank you, Urban League. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Urban League. Thank you.
Have a good
Yes,
night.
thank you, Urban League. Thank you all. Good night.